Number 26, professional services agreement with FM3 Research for a public opinion survey, presented by Mr. Michael Rocker, City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This item is an item recommending that the city hire a professional services agreement for a public opinion survey, with the idea that the FM3 would create questions to survey our public, and they would survey a sample size of roughly 1,000 people probably, but we'll get into the details with them exactly how many people they need to survey to have a what they call a 95 to 98% confidence level. And they can survey them on any questions that the council would like to ask. And so what I'm recommending is that this item, if it's approved tonight, come back to the City Council for discussion on the questions that would be asked in the opinion survey, and that the consultant would also explain the methodology and the process and how they do the survey and why they can get a confidence level as high as 95 to 98% in terms of the accuracy of the poll. I would hope that we could get back to the council with that discussion within the next 4 weeks, so that the questions can be formulated and then they can do the poll. This does not in any way suggest that the council is embarking down the path of a revenue measure. That is not what's happening, just so that that's very clear. This is strictly an opinion survey to find out what the public thinks about the city, the services the city provides, and to see what the public's top priorities are, concerns, things they would like the city to do that isn't being done, or things that they like the city is doing that are being done, and all of those kinds of questions can be asked on the survey, including whether the public is interested in a revenue measure for a local sales tax, which is only paid on durable goods under California state sales tax law and only by consumers. Is not a flat tax that everybody pays the same way. It's paid based on how much you consume of durable goods that meet the exact definition of a sales tax in California. And food is not taxed in California, and services are not taxed at all. Only durable goods, things you can touch and feel. So the idea tonight is that the council go through this process in order to see what the public has to say about the way in which city services are delivered, and what their thoughts are about whether the city should try to generate more revenue in order to meet the needs of what residents have already told us they would like to see us do, and based on what we heard earlier tonight on the backlog of infrastructure needs, both on buildings, streets, and other capital projects. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
No questions so far. Any public comment? Nothing. Go ahead.
This is a difficult one for me. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the efforts of Mayor Harris and Councilman Shaw in a scrub of the budget process with Robin and her staff at the beginning of the year of the budget process. I've given this a lot of consideration and sought guidance from folks in the community. I think that moving forward at this point would be a bit ill-advised, and the reason for that is not because we don't need additional money to do projects. I still think there's some more work to do in regards to the budget. And I realize that we're pretty close to the bone, but I'm still pretty interested in another look-see by our subcommittee. I also think it's important, because this is a highly charged, it's going to be a highly charged subject with the community that I represent, that we strategize a bit more about how we're going to play this out and before we go out with a survey that's going to cost us $30,000 to determine public opinion. I think that at this point, based upon the presentation tonight, and which is the reason I asked the question on slide 22, it looks like we do have a little bit of time until the trajectory is such that we need to start to receive revenue. That's my opinion, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it with the council.
Thank you very much. Anybody have a comment?
Michael, I think the idea of doing an opinion, I'm a person who likes data, to understand what, in various shapes and forms, and surveying surveys and opinion polls, those things are interesting just to know kind of a trend of where things are at in the community. And the questions, I'm hoping that if we do agree to do this, that the questions be related to the essential services, as our vice mayor often refers to, and those essential services that we offer as a city. I don't always know, because I hear, we talk with the community often, if our community always understands what are those essential services. So I think it would be helpful to, if the survey was designed, if we were to do this, around those essential services, to understand affordable housing is a big issue that I hear a lot from the community that I'm in circles with, and also infrastructure seems to be often a conversation that comes up, and then I would have an interest to know if the community knows what our goals and priorities are, if they understand what we've developed together with our executive team and staffing. And I personally don't think that this is a clear roadmap to an idea of a measure or anything else. I'm looking at it, what is the public thinking of what's happening? There's been so much change in this last year, so it'd be interesting to do some of that surveying. And I would also hope that if we do the survey, that it would be translated in other languages and available to populations that are not always perhaps included in the discussion of what's going on in their world. So I'm looking at it from that venue. I'm looking at it as a point in time discussion. Will this help us? And then the roadmap for where we're, our revenue could take a dive. It could take a dive sooner because we don't understand sometimes, the change of the markets. And it made me a little uncomfortable when the audit gentleman said that if we receive no money, that the city only really has enough money for 3 months or something. And that made me feel really uncomfortable. I thought, oh gosh, but thankfully I think we're good, right? Right, Robin? Okay, good. So those are my thoughts as we move forward. If we all agree, I would be interested. I know $30,000 sounds like a large amount, and it is a large amount. Yet for this kind of work, it seems to be the going rate, and at least in my experience.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Through the mayor. Talking very candidly, Mr. Rock, you and I have talked in your office about this survey, and you know my feelings quite well on this. Right now, I think that this is stepping out too fast, too quick, and I think further discussion needs to ensue on this. I had a lot of concern and questions concerning the last survey that went out, and I'll just be quite candid. I believe it was probably the most ridiculous survey I'd seen in a long time. I actually saw the survey. It was, do you want better police? Do you want better fire? Do you want to eat? Do you want to breathe? Is how I equate it. Of course, everyone's going to say yes. If we go forward with any type of quality of life survey or anything at this time, with everything that the other municipalities are doing, it's going to be on the table instantly. People are going, they're after a rev measure. Even though we know that this is just a precursor to that. I think the council needs to have more deliberation amongst ourselves and talk about what we really want to ask in the survey. And find out maybe what people really want. But I think trying to do it now at December to try to hurry and get something out in January, we're just clipping along at too fast of a pace. And the one thing that this council has done during the past 12 months is won back the trust of the community and the taxpayers. And I do not want to jeopardize that at all. My recommendation would be to slow down. Let's have further open discussions about, is this the right course? What are we thinking? We've already gone through the budget process once, and it was the first time the council has ever really participated in that. Robin, you've done a great job. Spencer, you're going to do a great job. But as the priorities have changed over the years, our budget, because of the direction of the council, is starting to line up truly with our priorities. And I've seen that this past year. So I think we need to just walk very gingerly through this. There may be a point in time to do the survey, but my suggestion is it's not January or February of 2020. I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to go on before we get too far ahead of this and present the wrong message. So.
All right. And did I have already asked for public comment? Mm-hmm. Have I? Okay. All right. Well, it is definitely important to hear the opinions and the survey of our community and how they feel about how we're doing and what we're doing and why we're doing it. I do concur that, let's face it, it's good to know some stuff, but we really want to know, based on the report today especially, what is the appetite for the willingness of a revenue measure. And I do believe we do have some more room to discuss that. We do, perhaps we can talk about the budget a little bit more. I do not think we have millions of dollars, which is what we need to make us where we want to be. So eventually we'll probably be looking at something like that. But I concur that perhaps it might be too much too soon, and timing is everything. It's very important to get the message out there for folks. But again, yeah, it's clear that what we want to do is figure out what our options are to generate revenue. $30,000 for something basically dressed up. How do you feel about whatever, when we really want to get down to that one question of, will you support a revenue measure? Perhaps the timing is a little bit off for that. So do we?
Let me be clear, Mayor. Yeah, I don't, and fellow council members, I'm not seeing this as a full-blown, we're on the path to the measure. That's not my view about doing the survey. Again, I'm looking at it, my discipline is a master's with social work. We utilize a lot of surveys to understand the needs of different areas that we work with. So in looking, I'm not looking just as a revenue to say the revenue for this next following year. If we were to then turn into maybe every 2-year budget review, this might just help us in finding that trend, that where we at right now with the community. Again, I'm asking to expand who we're surveying, and those that were asked to be in the last survey that I never saw, Councilman Shaw, thankfully, that it would add, maybe we can add other community members that are not always asked, what is your opinion? What do you think about this community? So I'm looking at it from that vantage point, and to determine those other outcomes, what other revenues do we have to look for, or what is it that we can offer differently? That discussion comes down the line. But I would be supportive of this if no one else, I motioned this and everyone else said no, I would be okay with that. But I'm just saying that there's something more than just a measure revenue out of this. Those are my thoughts.
Through the mayor. Councilmember Espandola, you're spot on with what you're saying. Is what we're saying, and that is we're talking about going out and doing a survey and spending $30,000, even though it's a small amount. But things that I've shared with our city manager is the same thing. I don't think 1,000 people are enough. We've got to have a good cross section. What kind of questions are we going to ask? These are the discussions that all have to happen before we ever get to the point of hiring that consultant to come in and say, let's do this. Because we need to get our act together with what our expectations are and what we're really driving for before we go here. So to me, this is premature.
I can respect that, Councilman Shaw. I'm thinking that as a consultant that this person would walk us through that process and allow us to come to some sort of decision about the questions, because it was important to me to have input on the design of the questions. I've done, I've been involved in multiple types of surveys and opinion polls that I've done professionally and for my discipline. So that would be important. If you're saying, eventually we might get there, we need to do a little more work, I'd be supportive of that. But I'm okay with this process because I think I understand it. That's probably going to get us there. But if we don't want to spend the money first and do some prep work ourselves with our team, but let's put a time frame to that. Let's put, where at what point do we make that decision and say, okay, no, we're not going to go opinion poll. We tried doing the prep work. It's taking longer than a year. And looking at our forecasting of fiscal issues, a year, 2020 is next month. And so looking at that view, it's really, we only have one more year because then 2020 then is the following year. So, and we don't know all of the market. And looking at our economy, our medium income households are what, 50, 40,000 a year. And we want to develop these $400,000, $500,000 lot homes. Where are these folks going to come from? That's why I keep asking, are they coming from Sacramento to buy those lots? I'm good. But our people in our community, the majority of our folks, cannot afford them. So that's what I want to know. Do you know our goals and priorities? Do you know the essential services of this city? Are you accessing those services? How often are you involved? Do you have problems with your water bills? Those kinds of things I would be interested to know as a representative of this community from a variety of folks. Well, let's do the roll call.
I mean, through the mayor, I understand what the council is saying. I'm just trying to figure out, it sounds to me like what the council would like to do is have a study session where we talk about what is the survey, how is it done, what kind of questions do you want to ask, and just have very, like a starting point, because there's got to be a starting point somewhere if it's the desire to seek out information that may, and I stress the word may, lead to a revenue measure. You got to start somewhere. So the question is, do you start with just informal discussions in a study session atmosphere where the council can ask and formulate essentially the questions that you would like to ask to get information that would help you then determine whether or not you would pursue some sort of revenue measure? And there's lots of different types of revenue measures. The idea is to keep this as open-minded as possible until the council can figure out what may be the best course of action. Of course, there's majority vote measures and 2/3 vote measures, and there's elections that are held only every other year, and there's also elections that are held anytime you want to hold an election for a 2/3 vote. So there's lots of different ways this can go if the council even gets there. So The only thing I'm trying to figure out is if the council would like to discuss it in an open session and in a workshop session, we would still need some professional advice on how those, processes work. And so I just need to figure out how we could get that advice without, the entire survey costs $30,000, but getting professional advice on how to do a survey and what kind of questions to ask, that probably would cost a lot less. And that could be something that we could look into if the council has an interest in starting the process from that point. So I'm just, because I'm hearing that you would like to talk about it and you would like to try to figure out, a little slower pace. I get that. And again, we can go as slow as you need to go in terms of getting enough people involved and engaged in the conversation. That's fine. Because, when you have this many people in a city, it takes a while to get people engaged. And I totally understand that. So those are my thoughts. And
well, that all makes sense. Nice to have somebody input to kind of steer the conversation. We have this thing called the Brown Act, and so none of us have discussed this in any detail to see where each other's coming from. And so we do need to have that conversation in an open forum, and I think that would be our best next step.
Okay.
Yeah.
Through the mayor.
Yes, sir.
And I did mention this to the city manager, so it's not new information. I think the public needs to be engaged in these discussions 100% before we get out in front of our skis, so to speak. I think that the sessions we need to have are similar to the one we had with the development impact fees. I know it's going to take time, but this is, and I know that we have financial needs. I know that as well as any of us up here. But I think this is a significant step for this council to take to even consider. The first sentence here says to survey the residents of the city to see if there's support for a revenue measure. The minute this gets out, if we'd approve this thing, they're going to come, here we come, it's a tax measure. Is that really what we're going to do? I know that's not the intent, but that's how this thing is written. And, for me, a lot of this is about strategically wading through public opinion, figuring out what the public will support, and being open and transparent. I know that's a word that's used a lot today, but we need to have that level of transparency with those folks that we represent. I would hope that at some point we'd be able to earn their trust or continue to earn their trust. They would see that we have done everything that we could do here to trim the budget, and that we really do have a demonstrated need to help with roads and infrastructure and whatever it is at that point we need. But at this particular in time, I think pump the brakes a little bit. Let's go through the process of engaging the public and seeking where they're at. Now, whether we need to do a facilitator or not for that, I'm lukewarm to that. I'm willing to listen, but we represent the people. We can get out in front of the people. We did it when we ran. We do it every other Tuesday night. So again, I don't want to sound like Debbie Downer and I'm against all this. I just think there's a process that needs to be followed, and I'd like for us to follow the process.
I support that.
And if we get to
Yeah, I know, I support that. I think, if they're still awake, I'm sure they're probably watching us, but I like the idea of continuing to engage the public. I just want to diversify that engagement of public and allowing people from multiple sets of groups of our community and ages, because, we have a large senior population as well, that sometimes, their needs are going to be different than others. So I looked at it as an opportunity to really maybe target ourselves and where are we at besides what we hear from our city staff. So we could do it this way, what you're suggesting, and I've done those, and those are more like focus groups where you don't, people are coming in and giving you their input. I would be open to that if that's what we all agree to. But I like to see a variety of people here, and I appreciate the folks that come here normally most Tuesdays, but I really would like to see a wider range of community.
Yeah. Through the mayor. I hear what you're saying, and it seems to me the next step would be to have essentially a study session community meeting where we can get as many people as possible to just begin the discussion. There's got to be a beginning point somewhere. And yeah, we need to put on the brakes. That's sort of the taskmaster part of me that, you know, that's me, and I take responsibility for this. But it's a big city, and we need to get as many people involved as possible from the beginning, not in the middle or the end, and that is very important. And I have done revenue measures before, and it is, it can be a very long process. You know, Roseville's process took almost 2 years. So I understand that we need to go at the pace that this community is comfortable with. So I would suggest that the next step would be that we set up a special study session whenever the council's comfortable doing that. It could be at the end of January when people are settled down and back in their routines. And then go from there and see how that meeting goes, and then we can evaluate along the way.
Thank you. I think it kind of aligns with everything. I think the study session trying to get the groundwork going, and then the outreach as well, even if we have to go to a series of different meetings and go into the other communities themselves to make sure we are communicating with them to where it's a little more comfortable for them to come to a meeting.
Yeah, we would do some extensive outreach.
And I think the communication, the reasoning, lay out in as simple as possible terms where the budget is, where we want to be, why we have concerns, our roads alone. We're millions and millions of dollars short. And the more open we are about that and the more potholes people hit, I think it helps with the success rather than ramrodding it through and hoping for the best.
Yeah, and there's two ways to go about this, and I think that you know, doing some public education and community dialogue first and then doing the survey also makes a lot of sense, maybe more sense, because you know, now you're getting their public's opinion after they've been informed, right, and they've had a back and forth dialogue with their elected officials and staff who are presenting information. And, you know, that kind of survey has some value, I think more value, in terms of where people might be at that particular point in time after they've had some information and dialogue. So that could work well. And we'll see where we go.
All right, so that'll be the direction. We clear on any questions on our next steps?
I'll have Judy get a hold of you to see when. It'll probably be more towards the end of it. It's not going to be before the end of January because we need to do the education and outreach to get people aware of the issue and to get them to a community meeting, which we probably would not hold in here. We would want to have it more relaxed and informal and more back and forth dialogue.
All right. Well, thank you very much.